After the first true battle, Zhenyuan did not receive peace. It received patience, evidence, maps, and a decision no one could push away. The White Tower Training Center was no longer a rumor at the edge of the city. It was a place with names erased, children waiting behind iron doors, and a system designed to turn wounded people into obedient weapons. At noon, the people rescued from the abandoned school arrive inside Zhenyuan's isolation line. The medical team falls silent when the 4 unfinished fate pattern bearers are brought in. They have treated wounds before, but these are not ordinary wounds. They are failed designs carved into living bodies. The difference between rescue and recklessness is procedure that still remembers the person inside the danger. Liang Xiyu, once a kindergarten teacher, carries an incomplete auxiliary pattern from her right shoulder to her collarbone, shaped like a torn eye or a damaged feather. Gray lines creep toward her neck, and the marks of a severed synchronization collar remain black around her throat. Du Heng is only 16. A chain-shaped artificial pattern crawls along his left forearm, and even after the collar is gone, his fingers twitch when he hears words like stop, obey, and close your eyes. White Tower power depends on making people into functions. Zhenyuan answers by making names matter again. Lu Jing breathes through a failed defensive pattern in his chest. The hardened plates that were meant to turn him into a shield are now pressing against his lungs. The 4th has no name. He is young, unconscious, and covered across the back with broken synchronization remnants. Qin Tang judges that he may still be waiting for a White Tower signal. A city is not built only by winning fights. It is built when the people left behind can still decide without the leader in the room. Bai Ling writes their categories carefully. 3 are high risk. The nameless one is placed at the edge of level 4, not fully condemned, because she refuses to execute a person before the attempt to save him has even begun. This is why the scene has to breathe before moving on. Zhenyuan is not simply collecting facts, it is learning what those facts demand from everyone who hears them. A broken pattern on a shoulder changes medical policy. A child's reaction to a command word changes how guards speak inside the tents. A half-burned chart changes the route of an assault. Each detail becomes a responsibility, and responsibility is heavier than anger because it cannot be spent in one strike. Shen Jin understands that the White Tower's most dangerous habit is not cruelty by itself. It is classification. Once a person becomes a bearer, a failed unit, a transport item, or a disposable asset, every next violence becomes easier to justify. Zhenyuan's answer begins in language before it reaches weapons. Patient. Name. Witness. Cost. Risk. Those words keep people from vanishing into the enemy's categories. The outer ring will not understand all of this immediately. Some will ask why scarce medicine goes to people who might become dangerous. Some will ask why children from a White Tower site are being brought inside the line. The answer cannot be a slogan. It has to be visible in ledgers, isolation rules, guard rotations, and medical limits, or fear will turn rescue into another kind of rejection. For the people at the isolation line, this is the first time victory from an outside mission has arrived looking like a question instead of a supply crate. The 4 bearers do not make the city feel stronger. They make it feel responsible. That responsibility spreads from the medical beds to the guards, from the guards to the ledgers, and from the ledgers to every person who will later ask why Zhenyuan spent so much to save people who might never fight for it. Shen Jin does not answer that question with a speech because speeches are too easy to forget when medicine runs low. He answers by allowing the cost to be counted openly and the names to be protected privately. That balance is fragile, but it is exactly the kind of fragile thing a real order has to defend. The moment carries forward without closing the thread. Zhenyuan has learned that every rescue creates another duty, every record opens another wound, and every rule will be tested exactly when breaking it would feel easiest. That is why no one is allowed to treat this as a clean heroic advance. The path into the training center is built from frightened testimony, medical limits, public costs, uneasy alliances, and the stubborn insistence that a person remains a person even after the enemy has tried to turn them into a function. Each step forward therefore has two meanings. It moves Zhenyuan closer to the White Tower, and it forces Zhenyuan to decide what kind of power it will refuse to become. Saving them becomes a rule Zhenyuan must prove it really believes. Bai Ling states the hard truth in front of Zhou Ping, who helped bring them back. Rescue does not mean survival is guaranteed. Some people can be saved only if the team accepts that a failed rescue may end in containment. Zhenyuan survives because it keeps turning emotion into rules before panic can spend it. Qin Tang explains that the White Tower mixed artificial auxiliary patterns with synchronization control. Liang Xiyu may have a failed sensory pattern. Du Heng carries a command-receiving line. Lu Zheng's defensive pattern is crushing him. The Nameless One's back is part of a failed synchronization array. The steps are written on the board: break external control, stabilize the pollution reaction, then judge whether a pattern can be preserved, sealed, or cut away. Shen Jin's hardest lesson is that not every urgent truth should be paid for with his body. Luo Jianming agrees to build jamming around the isolation sheds. It cannot promise perfection, but it can reduce short-range signals and give the nameless patient a chance not to become a weapon inside Zhenyuan. Su Li counts the cost and does not hide from it. The first day of care for 4 unfinished bearers will consume as much as a dozen ordinary patients. Mercy is not soft here. It is a discipline that refuses to let the enemy choose what everyone must become. Shen Jin orders the spending recorded but not reduced. Su Li clarifies that he needs it listed as special medical expenditure so the public ledger can answer questions without turning injured people into public property. That entry matters. Zhenyuan writes them down as patients, not trophies, not labor, and not samples. Zhenyuan survives because it keeps turning emotion into rules before panic can spend it. Qin Tang's work also changes under this pressure. Before, fate pattern research often meant finding enough strength to survive the next attack. Now it means drawing forbidden lines around useful techniques. The White Tower proves every day that effectiveness is not the same as legitimacy. A method can work and still be a poison that changes the people who adopt it. Bai Ling carries the same argument through medicine. She is not gentler because she refuses to kill quickly, and she is not cruel because she admits some patients may need to be contained. She is trying to preserve the narrow path where rescue remains honest. That path requires witnesses, thresholds, written categories, and the courage to say both not yet and no further. Zhou Ping has to learn this in a more personal way. He saw the classroom. He heard the plea for help. In his heart, bringing those people back should mean saving them. Zhenyuan forces him to grow past that first hope without despising it. A commander cannot be allowed to believe that good intentions remove consequences. This pressure also changes Su Li's public accounting. The ledger can no longer be only food, batteries, fuel, and weapons. It has to include categories for rescue, isolation, long-term care, and people who cannot repay anything for a very long time. In a collapsing world, that kind of category is radical because it says value does not begin with usefulness. Bai Ling knows the danger of that statement. If she saves too few, she becomes only another gatekeeper of survival. If she accepts everyone without limits, she can endanger the whole outer ring. Her authority rests in the thin space between those failures, and everyone watching can feel how narrow it is. The moment carries forward without closing the thread. Zhenyuan has learned that every rescue creates another duty, every record opens another wound, and every rule will be tested exactly when breaking it would feel easiest. That is why no one is allowed to treat this as a clean heroic advance. The path into the training center is built from frightened testimony, medical limits, public costs, uneasy alliances, and the stubborn insistence that a person remains a person even after the enemy has tried to turn them into a function. Each step forward therefore has two meanings. It moves Zhenyuan closer to the White Tower, and it forces Zhenyuan to decide what kind of power it will refuse to become. Liang Xiyu begins to speak, and the training center becomes more than a map. Bai Ling calls the first conversation questioning, not interrogation. Liang Xiyu lies in the isolation bed with her shoulder fixed and her eyes always searching the door for someone who might drag her back. White Tower power depends on making people into functions. Zhenyuan answers by making names matter again. When she sees Zhou Ping outside the clear barrier, she recognizes him as the person at the classroom window. The recognition steadies her enough to answer. She remembers white corridors, iron doors, a waiting room, an injection room, and another room she never entered but heard through the walls. A city is not built only by winning fights. It is built when the people left behind can still decide without the leader in the room. She marks one place with a phrase that freezes everyone who later sees the page, the children's waiting room. The words make the training center stop being a tactical objective. It becomes a place where the White Tower sorted frightened people by usefulness, age, pain tolerance, and whether their bodies could carry a line. The difference between rescue and recklessness is procedure that still remembers the person inside the danger. Du Heng wakes in fragments and reacts to command words. Lu Zheng's breathing worsens. The nameless patient twitches under signal noise, proving the risk is real. Every report pushes Zhenyuan toward the same conclusion. Waiting will save resources, but it will also give the White Tower time to move children, destroy files, and erase names. White Tower power depends on making people into functions. Zhenyuan answers by making names matter again. Liang Xiyu's memory becomes a map because no one treats it as broken noise. Her lines shake, and some distances are wrong, but the emotional order is precise. A door she feared. A room where injections happened. A place where children waited. Trauma does not make her useless to the operation. It tells Zhenyuan where to look and what must not be left behind. That is another way Zhenyuan differs from the White Tower. The White Tower extracts value from bodies and discards the person. Zhenyuan takes testimony from a survivor while still recognizing the survivor is more than testimony. Liang Xiyu's drawing matters, but Liang Xiyu matters even if the drawing had shown nothing. The phrase about the children changes the tempo of the entire campaign. Until then, the training center could still be discussed as a node, a route, a storage point, a hostile structure. After that phrase, every delay has faces inside it. Not visible faces yet, but imagined ones, which can be worse because the mind fills the room with every child it cannot protect. Zhou Ping's presence outside Liang Xiyu's bed also becomes important for the younger defenders. They see that a scout's obligation does not end when he reports coordinates. He must also face the living result of the decision he made. That does not mean he controls the medical outcome. It means he does not get to hide behind the word mission when people remember his face. Liang Xiyu, for her part, is not turned into a symbol inside the room. She is frightened, inconsistent, and exhausted. Sometimes she remembers a door with perfect clarity and forgets how long she waited behind it. Sometimes she answers a question and then shakes so badly that Bai Ling stops the conversation. That stopping is part of the testimony too. The moment carries forward without closing the thread. Zhenyuan has learned that every rescue creates another duty, every record opens another wound, and every rule will be tested exactly when breaking it would feel easiest. That is why no one is allowed to treat this as a clean heroic advance. The path into the training center is built from frightened testimony, medical limits, public costs, uneasy alliances, and the stubborn insistence that a person remains a person even after the enemy has tried to turn them into a function. Each step forward therefore has two meanings. It moves Zhenyuan closer to the White Tower, and it forces Zhenyuan to decide what kind of power it will refuse to become. Late at night, Qin Tang finds the clue hidden inside White Tower mistakes. The fate pattern room remains lit long after the outer ring quiets. On the tables lie the mother core shell, the severed synchronized auxiliary pattern, extraction equipment, lure blood data, medical charts, and Liang Xiyu's trembling sketch. Shen Jin's hardest lesson is that not every urgent truth should be paid for with his body. A small fragment from Duan Qi's case looks like an equipment maintenance record until Qin Tang reveals pale lines on the back. They curve like a single horn reaching forward. It is not the earth-bearing seal, not the candle dragon eye, and not the thunder marsh drum. Shen Jin recognizes the incomplete form as Xiezhi Horn. Mercy is not soft here. It is a discipline that refuses to let the enemy choose what everyone must become. He has seen a broken version in the previous life. Its power is not brute force. It discerns lies, severs false contracts, and breaks commands that violate a person's will. The discovery strikes exactly where Zhenyuan needs help. The White Tower uses collars, command patterns, synchronized squads, hostage deception, and false information. Xiezhi Horn is not simply another weapon. It is a blade made for cutting the logic behind their system. Zhenyuan survives because it keeps turning emotion into rules before panic can spend it. Qin Tang realizes that fragments of the horn line were mixed into Duan Qi's synchronization pattern. The White Tower tried to make a truth-cutting line serve control, and that misuse left a weakness. They only saw function. They never respected the rank or meaning of the pattern. That is why their system can be broken. Shen Jin's hardest lesson is that not every urgent truth should be paid for with his body. The Xiezhi clue does not feel like a gift. It feels like a challenge placed exactly where Zhenyuan's principles are weakest. If a line can discern falsehood and break wrongful command, then using it seems obvious. But the White Tower also began with obvious uses. It saw fear and asked how fear could be directed. It saw pain and asked how pain could be weaponized. It saw obedience and asked how obedience could be manufactured. Qin Tang is therefore not only solving a technical problem. She is defending meaning. A fate pattern is not a neutral machine waiting for any purpose. Its rank, origin, and symbolic direction affect what it can safely become. Misreading that is why the White Tower leaves cracks in its own devices. Shen Jin's previous life gives him recognition, but not permission. Memory lets him name the horn, recall its functions, and anticipate the weakness inside synchronized command. It does not exempt him from the rules Zhenyuan has built around his body. If anything, it makes those rules more necessary, because he is always tempted to pay tomorrow's price today. The Xiezhi fragment gives Qin Tang a new fear. The White Tower may not simply be ahead of Zhenyuan in technique. It may be wrong in ways that still produce devastating results. A flawed theory can kill as effectively as a correct one if enough bodies are forced through it. Shen Jin's memories can identify the direction of the line, but Qin Tang has to translate that memory into something usable by people who did not live his previous life. She needs diagrams, test limits, failure signs, and a way for someone other than Shen Jin to understand when the pattern is crossing from discernment into backlash. The moment carries forward without closing the thread. Zhenyuan has learned that every rescue creates another duty, every record opens another wound, and every rule will be tested exactly when breaking it would feel easiest. That is why no one is allowed to treat this as a clean heroic advance. The path into the training center is built from frightened testimony, medical limits, public costs, uneasy alliances, and the stubborn insistence that a person remains a person even after the enemy has tried to turn them into a function. Each step forward therefore has two meanings. It moves Zhenyuan closer to the White Tower, and it forces Zhenyuan to decide what kind of power it will refuse to become. The answer is useful, and that makes it dangerous. Shen Jin suggests opening only a partial contract discernment line. Qin Tang's face hardens immediately because she has heard too many versions of that sentence from him. A city is not built only by winning fights. It is built when the people left behind can still decide without the leader in the room. He argues that the new line does not need a wide area or heavy territory pressure. Qin Tang answers that a calamity-suppressing pattern cannot be treated like a spare part. Her anger is not about obedience. It is about carrying risk correctly. Shen Jin understands battle risk, but he often underestimates the cost his body pays for becoming the place where impossible tools are opened. The difference between rescue and recklessness is procedure that still remembers the person inside the danger. Bai Ling's medical restrictions are still active. The earth-bearing line has not recovered. The Candle Dragon Eye and Thunder Marsh Drum are limited. On any sane schedule, Shen Jin should be resting. The training center gives them no sane schedule. Children may be moved. Unfinished bearers may be erased. White Tower records may burn before dawn. White Tower power depends on making people into functions. Zhenyuan answers by making names matter again. Qin Tang does not forbid the attempt because she knows refusal may cost lives. Instead, she narrows the conditions: no full opening, no solo use, no hidden activation, an immediate stop if the line bites into the nerves. Zhenyuan's strength lies in this argument. They are not fearless. They are willing to bind courage with witnesses. A city is not built only by winning fights. It is built when the people left behind can still decide without the leader in the room. The argument between Qin Tang and Shen Jin is one of the ways their partnership becomes stronger. Agreement would be easier, especially before a strike, but easy agreement is not trust. Qin Tang's refusal to nod along proves that Shen Jin is not alone at the center of decision-making, and Shen Jin's willingness to accept conditions proves he is learning to be carried without calling it weakness. Bai Ling's invisible presence sits inside this conversation as well. Her medical orders have changed the battlefield before the strike even begins. Every talisman, every limit, every contingency exists because Zhenyuan has finally admitted that its strongest fighter can become a casualty through overuse as surely as through enemy attack. The partial line is therefore not a loophole. It is a negotiated risk. That distinction matters. A loophole hides from rules. A negotiated risk stands in front of witnesses, names its cost, and leaves someone with the authority to stop it. Their disagreement is also watched by the assistants in the room. Those younger members learn something essential: expertise is allowed to challenge command. Qin Tang does not soften her objection because Shen Jin is the founder of Zhenyuan. Shen Jin does not punish the objection because the objection protects the operation. That may sound like a small institutional detail, but it is the exact opposite of the White Tower. In the training center, rank turns people into instruments. In Zhenyuan, the right to stop a dangerous act is becoming part of the system. The difference will decide who survives the power they learn to use. The moment carries forward without closing the thread. Zhenyuan has learned that every rescue creates another duty, every record opens another wound, and every rule will be tested exactly when breaking it would feel easiest. That is why no one is allowed to treat this as a clean heroic advance. The path into the training center is built from frightened testimony, medical limits, public costs, uneasy alliances, and the stubborn insistence that a person remains a person even after the enemy has tried to turn them into a function. Each step forward therefore has two meanings. It moves Zhenyuan closer to the White Tower, and it forces Zhenyuan to decide what kind of power it will refuse to become. The night before the strike, the outer ring prepares for its first deliberate offensive. By evening, every post in Zhenyuan is quieter than usual. The cold chain warehouse, supermarket, pharmacy, old logistics station, mall south gate, and convenience store second line all enter night defense, knowing the next day will not be a defensive reaction. Mercy is not soft here. It is a discipline that refuses to let the enemy choose what everyone must become. The target is the White Tower Training Center, the largest western node of Yiming's system. The attack meeting is held in the cold chain warehouse. Shen Jin sits because Bai Ling still limits his body. Qin Tang brings 2 external contract discernment talismans. Chen Yue is present with his left arm still restricted. Su Li brings ledgers, Luo Jianming brings communication maps, and Han Tai joins by radio. Zhenyuan survives because it keeps turning emotion into rules before panic can spend it. On the board, Shen Jin circles 3 goals: save people, take records, destroy the synchronization array. He does not list killing Yiming as the first goal. If revenge becomes the target, the White Tower can steer them with hostages. If the system is the target, the enemy loses what matters even if Yiming runs. Shen Jin's hardest lesson is that not every urgent truth should be paid for with his body. Bai Ling warns that not everyone wearing White Tower clothing is necessarily an enemy. Some may be coerced assistants. Some may be unfinished bearers. Han Tai complains that Zhenyuan makes war complicated. Bai Ling answers that this is why Zhenyuan does not turn its own people into experiment material. Mercy is not soft here. It is a discipline that refuses to let the enemy choose what everyone must become. The attack meeting shows how far Zhenyuan has come since the first days of warehouse survival. There are maps now, departments, representatives, medical vetoes, logistics terms, radio links, and allied constraints. None of that makes the coming fight safe. It makes the fight belong to more than one person's courage. Shen Jin's 3 goals sound simple, but each one resists the enemy's logic. Saving people rejects the idea of failed assets. Taking records rejects erasure. Destroying the synchronization array rejects the system that turns persons into extensions of command. Killing He Ming would satisfy rage. Breaking the system changes the future. Even Han Tai's complaints help define the difference. To him, Zhenyuan's war looks burdened by rules. To Bai Ling, those rules are the reason war does not become an experiment by another name. The room does not need Han Tai to become gentle. It needs him to understand the boundary clearly enough not to cross it. At the attack meeting, every representative brings a different kind of fear. The defenders fear being too few. The medical group fears preventable deaths. The logistics side fears a rescue that starves later patients. The communication team fears silence at the wrong minute. Han Tai fears being used without compensation, which is still a kind of fear even when it sounds like bargaining. Shen Jin has to hold all of that without turning the room into a personal command performance. He has the final plan, but the plan becomes real only because each department can see its own part inside it. That is what makes this strike different from a desperate raid. The moment carries forward without closing the thread. Zhenyuan has learned that every rescue creates another duty, every record opens another wound, and every rule will be tested exactly when breaking it would feel easiest. That is why no one is allowed to treat this as a clean heroic advance. The path into the training center is built from frightened testimony, medical limits, public costs, uneasy alliances, and the stubborn insistence that a person remains a person even after the enemy has tried to turn them into a function. Each step forward therefore has 2 meanings. It moves Zhenyuan closer to the White Tower, and it forces Zhenyuan to decide what kind of power it will refuse to become. The team list proves Zhenyuan has grown beyond one fighter. The strike team has 12 members. Shen Jin will command and carry the calamity-suppressing lines. Qin Tang will read patterns and manage the talismans. Zhou Ping leads the forward shield. Fang Yuan joins as outside cooperative defense. Luo Jianming handles communications and entry. The difference between rescue and recklessness is procedure that still remembers the person inside the danger. Chen Yue is not on the strike team. The room understands the decision before Shen Jin explains it, and that does not make it easier. Chen Yue wants to go. His shield has earned its place in every hard fight Zhenyuan has survived. But his arm is not fully recovered, and the outer ring cannot be emptied of everyone who can hold authority. White Tower power depends on making people into functions. Zhenyuan answers by making names matter again. Shen Jin orders Chen Yue to guard the city. If the White Tower sends remnants or Iron King gang hardliners to test the south while the strike team is away, Chen Yue can act without asking permission. That order transfers wartime defensive authority. It also proves trust. A city is not built only by winning fights. It is built when the people left behind can still decide without the leader in the room. Han Tai is assigned the northern diversion. The Iron King gang will not enter the training center. Their task is to cut northern support and intercept transfer vehicles moving away from the site. Su Li reads the terms: fuel compensation, risk-based distribution of captured weapons, and no Iron King gang retention of unfinished bearers. Anyone rescued goes to Zhenyuan medical and fate pattern review. The difference between rescue and recklessness is procedure that still remembers the person inside the danger. It is not friendship. It is a boundary written clearly enough for cooperation. Leaving Chen Yue behind is a military decision and an emotional one. A group built around survival often wants its strongest people together, as if concentrating force can protect everyone. But a larger Zhenyuan cannot afford that instinct. If all strength leaves through one gate, the city becomes hollow behind it. Chen Yue accepting the defensive command is not a smaller role. It is the proof that Zhenyuan has become a structure. Shen Jin can leave because someone else can decide. The strike team can risk entering the center because the outer ring will not freeze if the radio goes silent. Fang Yuan's place in the team carries another kind of meaning. He is not Zhenyuan, not fully trusted, and not free of the Iron King gang's shadow. Yet he has passed enough rules to stand in the formation. Cooperation here is not romance between factions. It is a controlled test under pressure. Chen Yue's acceptance leaves a visible mark on Zhou Ping. The younger defender understands that if Chen Yue stays, then stepping forward does not mean replacing him. It means carrying a task Chen Yue has deliberately handed over. That distinction steadies him more than praise would have. Fang Yuan also hears the defensive authority transfer and understands something about Zhenyuan's trust structure. This place does not only admire strong fighters. It assigns responsibility where the system needs it, even when personal desire points elsewhere. For someone from the Iron King gang, that is an unfamiliar kind of strength. The moment carries forward without closing the thread. Zhenyuan has learned that every rescue creates another duty, every record opens another wound, and every rule will be tested exactly when breaking it would feel easiest. That is why no one is allowed to treat this as a clean heroic advance. The path into the training center is built from frightened testimony, medical limits, public costs, uneasy alliances, and the stubborn insistence that a person remains a person even after the enemy has tried to turn them into a function. Each step forward therefore has two meanings. It moves Zhenyuan closer to the White Tower, and it forces Zhenyuan to decide what kind of power it will refuse to become. Before dawn, the strike team enters by the path drawn from a survivor's memory. At 1:10 in the morning, the strike team reaches the abandoned school. The four bearers are gone, but chains, broken collars, medicine bottles, dried blood, and White Tower numbers remain. Zhenyuan survives because it keeps turning emotion into rules before panic can spend it. Numbers, not names. That detail tightens Zhou Ping's hand around his small shield. Han Tai's diversion begins to the north with controlled blasts and enough noise to pull White Tower attention toward the wrong gate. Shen Jin's hardest lesson is that not every urgent truth should be paid for with his body. Shen Jin gives Han Tai 20 minutes. Han Tai says he has 15 before the enemy realizes the northern attack is a feint. Shen Jin tells him to hold 15. The team enters through the rear logistics path Liang Xiyu described. The blue arrow sign is exactly where she said it would be. Mercy is not soft here. It is a discipline that refuses to let the enemy choose what everyone must become. Qin Tang checks the doorway for Lureblood agent and crying medium. Luo Jianming opens the lock. Zhou Ping takes the front, Fang Yuan covers the side, and the team moves into a white corridor smelling of disinfectant and blood. The contract discernment talisman cools in Shen Jin's palm. It is not a full warning, only the trace of command residue. The corridor has carried controlled people too many times. Zhenyuan survives because it keeps turning emotion into rules before panic can spend it. The approach through the abandoned school forces Zhou Ping to walk past the consequence of his earlier restraint. He did not save everyone immediately when he first saw them. He reported, marked, and returned with a force that could actually do something. The empty chains tell him that restraint did not mean indifference. The northern diversion also depends on imperfect trust. Han Tai will bargain, complain, and measure profit, but he has reason to hold the line. In a collapsed city, reliable alignment may matter more than pure loyalty. Zhenyuan does not need the Iron King gang to become virtuous overnight. It needs their chosen interests to be bound by clear terms. Every step through the rear path confirms Liang Xiyu's testimony. The blue arrow. The logistics door. The smell of disinfectant. These confirmations strengthen the plan, but they also darken the mood, because each correct detail proves she truly passed through this machinery of harm. The approach route is quiet in the way abandoned institutions become quiet after being used for something they were never meant to hold. A school should carry noise, lessons, and ordinary complaints. Here, the silence carries chains and numbered marks. That wrongness settles over the team before the first enemy appears. Shen Jin keeps the pace measured because the building is already working on their emotions. Every trace of harm invites speed. Every sign of abandonment asks them to chase. But the White Tower knows how to turn compassion into movement, and movement into exposure. The team survives by refusing to let the walls dictate tempo. The moment carries forward without closing the thread. Zhenyuan has learned that every rescue creates another duty, every record opens another wound, and every rule will be tested exactly when breaking it would feel easiest. That is why no one is allowed to treat this as a clean heroic advance. The path into the training center is built from frightened testimony, medical limits, public costs, uneasy alliances, and the stubborn insistence that a person remains a person even after the enemy has tried to turn them into a function. Each step forward therefore has two meanings. It moves Zhenyuan closer to the White Tower, and it forces Zhenyuan to decide what kind of power it will refuse to become. The records room shows how short a human life becomes in White Tower handwriting. The first room is a records office. Computers have been smashed, drawers emptied, and papers burned, but the White Tower did not have enough time to destroy everything. White Tower power depends on making people into functions. Zhenyuan answers by making names matter again. Qin Tang collects a half-burned roster, hard drive fragments, and a process chart from the wall while Shen Jin gives her 2 minutes. The chart lists the steps with obscene simplicity: initial screening, injection, reaction observation, collar adaptation, command test, failed disposal. A city is not built only by winning fights. It is built when the people left behind can still decide without the leader in the room. Every line is short. Too short for human beings. Bai Ling's face goes cold, but she does not stop moving. Anger has no value here unless it carries the records back alive. The difference between rescue and recklessness is procedure that still remembers the person inside the danger. The team advances to a second iron door. Behind it comes crying. Not a crying calamity. Real children. White Tower power depends on making people into functions. Zhenyuan answers by making names matter again. Bai Ling stops the forward line from rushing. Shen Jin assigns the breach. Luo Jianming opens the door. Zhou Ping holds the threshold. Fang Yuan guards the left. Qin Tang lifts the talisman. The records room is the kind of place that reveals a civilization's disease without raising its voice. There are no grand speeches on the wall, only forms. Intake. Reaction. Adaptation. Disposal. Evil becomes most efficient when it stops needing dramatic language. Qin Tang's decision to collect fragments rather than stand frozen is another form of discipline. Horror must be preserved as evidence, not merely felt as grief. If the papers leave the building, the White Tower loses the power to say these people never existed. Bai Ling, looking at the chart, understands the medical betrayal most sharply. The same terms that should belong to care have been turned into stages of use. Observation no longer means watching over a patient. It means measuring when the body can be pushed again. The half-burned roster becomes one of the most important objects in the assault because a roster can restore stolen names. Even if some entries are coded, even if some are incomplete, the record gives Zhenyuan a way to ask who is missing rather than merely count who is found. Qin Tang seals the fragments with a care usually reserved for volatile pattern material. In truth, these papers are volatile. They can ignite public anger, expose collaborators, guide future rescues, and prove that the training center's work was systematic. Evidence is dangerous because it survives the room where fear was meant to keep it contained. The moment carries forward without closing the thread. Zhenyuan has learned that every rescue creates another duty, every record opens another wound, and every rule will be tested exactly when breaking it would feel easiest. That is why no one is allowed to treat this as a clean heroic advance. The path into the training center is built from frightened testimony, medical limits, public costs, uneasy alliances, and the stubborn insistence that a person remains a person even after the enemy has tried to turn them into a function. Each step forward therefore has two meanings. It moves Zhenyuan closer to the White Tower, and it forces Zhenyuan to decide what kind of power it will refuse to become. The children's waiting room becomes the moral center of the assault. Inside are 17 children, the oldest barely teenagers and the youngest perhaps 4 or 5. Some have wrist bindings. Some have medicine patches behind the ears. None run when the door opens. Shen Jin's hardest lesson is that not every urgent truth should be paid for with his body. That is the worst part. They do not expect rescue enough to understand it. Bai Ling enters first with the medical assistant, voice low and hands visible. Qin Tang checks for active command lines. Zhou Ping keeps the doorway shielded, fighting the urge to look away from the terror on small faces. Mercy is not soft here. It is a discipline that refuses to let the enemy choose what everyone must become. One child whispers that they were told anyone outside the White Tower would kill failed children. Another asks whether the injections are over. Shen Jin feels the Xiezhi line in his palm bite cold. Not rage. Judgment. Zhenyuan survives because it keeps turning emotion into rules before panic can spend it. The goal of the attack sharpens. Records matter. The synchronization array matters. But these children are the living reason the training center cannot be allowed to finish withdrawing cleanly. The evacuation begins in controlled order. Zhenyuan cannot carry everyone at once, so Luo Jianming signals the rear route, and the outer support team prepares to receive the first group. Shen Jin's hardest lesson is that not every urgent truth should be paid for with his body. The White Tower planned to make hostages into a delay. Zhenyuan makes them the first priority without letting the whole formation collapse. The children's room forces the strike team to slow down at the exact moment speed feels most necessary. That is how the White Tower designs traps. It makes the right thing tactically expensive. Rush in, and a team may miss control marks. Delay, and the children remain afraid. Choose badly, and the enemy gets to define the cost of compassion. Bai Ling entering first is therefore not symbolic. It is operational. A frightened child may run from a shield but listen to a visible hand and a low voice. Qin Tang's talisman matters, but so does the sentence that tells a child their name will be asked before their condition. Shen Jin's anger has to become quiet here. If he lets rage lead, he becomes predictable. The White Tower expects moral injury to create disorder. Zhenyuan has to turn moral injury into evacuation routes, rear signals, and a formation that can protect the door while the smallest people move first. The children respond unevenly because fear has taught them different rules. One freezes. One hides another child's face. One repeats a number instead of a name. One asks whether the good children are the ones who do not cry. Bai Ling has to slow her own breathing before answering, because the answer must be simple enough to reach them. No one in the strike team will forget that room. Not because it is the bloodiest place, but because it makes the enemy's future visible. If the White Tower can train children to wait quietly for injections, then the organization is not merely fighting for territory. It is manufacturing the next generation of obedience. The moment carries forward without closing the thread. Zhenyuan has learned that every rescue creates another duty, every record opens another wound, and every rule will be tested exactly when breaking it would feel easiest. That is why no one is allowed to treat this as a clean heroic advance. The path into the training center is built from frightened testimony, medical limits, public costs, uneasy alliances, and the stubborn insistence that a person remains a person even after the enemy has tried to turn them into a function. Each step forward therefore has two meanings. It moves Zhenyuan closer to the White Tower, and it forces Zhenyuan to decide what kind of power it will refuse to become. The training center answers with synchronized violence. The alarm does not ring loudly. It pulses through the building as a low command tone that makes Du Heng's pattern back in Zhenyuan twitch against the jamming field. A city is not built only by winning fights. It is built when the people left behind can still decide without the leader in the room. Inside the center, white-coated assistants scatter, and armed personnel converge from the training area. Some fire willingly. Some move with the stiff timing of people pulled by a command line. That difference is exactly what Qin Tang's talisman and Shen Jin's partial Xiezhi line must read. The difference between rescue and recklessness is procedure that still remembers the person inside the danger. Zhou Ping takes the first impact at the corridor bend. Fang Yuan braces beside him, proving the Iron King gang candidate can hold Zhenyuan's formation under fire. Qin Tang marks one approaching fighter as controlled. Shen Jin orders a disabling strike instead of a kill. The team cuts the collar line and the man collapses shaking, alive. White Tower power depends on making people into functions. Zhenyuan answers by making names matter again. Another attacker carries no compulsion and tries to shoot into the room where children are being moved. That one is treated as enemy. The distinction slows them, but it keeps them human. A city is not built only by winning fights. It is built when the people left behind can still decide without the leader in the room. White Tower tactics depend on making mercy expensive. Zhenyuan pays the cost deliberately, because refusing that cost would let the enemy define the rules. Synchronized violence is more difficult to fight than ordinary hostility because it contaminates judgment. A shooter may be guilty, compelled, or both. A uniform may hide a volunteer or a captive. A command tone may turn a victim into an immediate threat. The battlefield becomes a courtroom with no time to deliberate. This is where Xiezhi Horn begins to justify its risk. Not because it makes the fight easy, but because it gives Zhenyuan enough distinction to keep from flattening everyone into enemy and target. The line does not remove responsibility. It makes responsibility harder to avoid. Zhou Ping and Fang Yuan holding together also matters. One represents Zhenyuan's trained discipline, the other represents a rougher northern force learning to stand inside someone else's rules. Under fire, the formation does not ask which origin is pure. It asks who can hold without breaking the boundary. The distinction between controlled and willing attackers cannot be perfect. Zhenyuan will make mistakes. The point is not purity, it is an active refusal to make indifference policy. Every time Qin Tang marks a control line and Shen Jin adjusts the order, the team declares that uncertainty is not permission to kill everyone. That declaration costs time, ammunition, and safety. White Tower fighters exploit it more than once, using restrained movement to buy seconds. Yet even those seconds teach the team how the enemy thinks. The White Tower assumes moral restraint is a weakness. Zhenyuan turns it into a method with limits, signals, and assigned roles. The moment carries forward without closing the thread. Zhenyuan has learned that every rescue creates another duty, every record opens another wound, and every rule will be tested exactly when breaking it would feel easiest. That is why no one is allowed to treat this as a clean heroic advance. The path into the training center is built from frightened testimony, medical limits, public costs, uneasy alliances, and the stubborn insistence that a person remains a person even after the enemy has tried to turn them into a function. Each step forward therefore has two meanings. It moves Zhenyuan closer to the White Tower, and it forces Zhenyuan to decide what kind of power it will refuse to become. The underground array reveals what the center was built to become. The route from the records room leads downward through a maintenance stair hidden behind a false supply wall. Liang Xiyu never saw it, but her map gave them enough to find the scene. Mercy is not soft here. It is a discipline that refuses to let the enemy choose what everyone must become. Below the training center lies a synchronization chamber. The floor is carved with incomplete artificial lines, and metal anchor points surround the central platform where bearers were likely fixed during command tests. Qin Tang sees Xiezhi fragments twisted into control loops. The misuse is everywhere. White Tower engineers tried to borrow truth-breaking authority and force it to become obedience. Zhenyuan survives because it keeps turning emotion into rules before panic can spend it. The result is powerful but unstable. It can command fear, pain, and reaction, but it cannot truly erase the contradiction at its center. Shen Jin kneels at the edge of the array, unable to use the earth-bearing line fully, unable to rely on the old methods that would crush his body. Shen Jin's hardest lesson is that not every urgent truth should be paid for with his body. Qin Tang places the external talismans. Luo Jianming sets charges where the equipment can be destroyed without burying the entire chamber. He Ming's voice comes through a speaker, calm and almost amused. He calls the children failed assets, the bearers unstable material, and Zhenyuan sentimental. Mercy is not soft here. It is a discipline that refuses to let the enemy choose what everyone must become. Shen Jin answers by activating the partial Xiezhi line. For one moment, the false contracts in the chamber become visible as gray threads, and every thread points to the same hidden core. The underground chamber is the White Tower's philosophy made physical. Lines that should judge coercion have been bent toward coercion. Platforms and anchor points make the body into infrastructure. The whole room says that consent is inefficient and personhood is an obstacle to command. Qin Tang's horror is technical and moral at once. She can admire the complexity of the array and still know that every elegant connection is a crime. That double vision is necessary. If Chen Yue looks away from the technical brilliance, it cannot defeat the system. If it admires the brilliance without judgment, it begins to become the system. He Ming's voice over the speaker tries to frame Zhenyuan as sentimental because that is how the White Tower protects itself from shame. If compassion is childish, then exploitation becomes maturity. Shen Jin's answer is not to argue. He opens the line designed to cut false bonds. The chamber also explains why He Ming was willing to abandon so much above ground. The true investment was below, a repeatable architecture of obedience. If that architecture remained intact, records could be rewritten, assistants replaced, and new bearers collected. The array was the branch's heart. Shen Jin sensing the threads feels nothing like using a weapon in open battle. It feels like hearing lies through the bones. Each false contract pulls at a living will. Some are faint. Some are brutally tight. Some are tangled around people who no longer have the strength to resist them consciously. Cutting them requires precision because a careless cut can tear what remains of the person beneath. The moment carries forward without closing the thread. Zhenyuan has learned that every rescue creates another duty, every record opens another wound, and every rule will be tested exactly when breaking it would feel easiest. That is why no one is allowed to treat this as a clean heroic advance. The path into the training center is built from frightened testimony, medical limits, public costs, uneasy alliances, and the stubborn insistence that a person remains a person even after the enemy has tried to turn them into a function. Each step forward therefore has two meanings. It moves Zhenyuan closer to the White Tower, and it forces Zhenyuan to decide what kind of power it will refuse to become. Breaking the array costs less than a full pattern, but not nothing. The Xiezhi line does not roar. It cuts. The difference between rescue and recklessness is procedure that still remembers the person inside the danger. Threads snap from collars, command marks, and artificial loops. Controlled fighters elsewhere in the building stumble as the shared timing breaks. The nameless patient in Zhenyuan's isolation shed stops convulsing for the first time that night. Shen Jin's nose bleeds. Qin Tang catches the tremor in his hand and orders him to stop before the line spreads beyond the planned segment. White Tower power depends on making people into functions. Zhenyuan answers by making names matter again. He obeys because the condition was agreed in advance. That obedience saves him from turning one necessary cut into another reckless overuse. Luo Jianming detonates the charges. The synchronization equipment shatters. Qin Tang's sealed packets protect the most important records while destroying the active control core. A city is not built only by winning fights. It is built when the people left behind can still decide without the leader in the room. He Ming does not remain to be captured. Like every White Tower operator who values systems over bodies, he has already prepared a retreat path. Shen Jin does not chase him. The goals on the board return with brutal clarity: save people, take records, destroy the array. The difference between rescue and recklessness is procedure that still remembers the person inside the danger. The array is broken. The records are in hand. The living still need to leave. The breaking of the array is deliberately restrained. A lesser story would turn the moment into a display of overwhelming power. Zhenyuan's version is more difficult: a precise cut, a controlled stop, and a refusal to let victory become another excuse for overreach. When the gray threads snap, the effect travels beyond the chamber. Controlled fighters lose timing. Callers fail to carry commands. The nameless patient in isolation quiets. Every signal of release proves that the White Tower system was never natural. It had to be maintained by violence, and violence can be interrupted. Shen Jin bleeding matters because the cost is real. Qin Tang stopping him matters because the rules are real. His obedience matters because leadership is not only choosing the risk, it is accepting the hand that prevents the risk from expanding past its purpose. When Qin Tang orders Shen Jin to stop, everyone close enough hears it. That matters. The leader is stopped in the middle of a decisive act, and the operation does not collapse. Instead, the plan continues exactly because the stop was part of the plan. This is how a dangerous power becomes survivable. The array's destruction is not total erasure of knowledge. Qin Tang keeps enough records to understand and counter the system. The equipment that enables control is destroyed. The information that can prevent future control is sealed. The difference is difficult, and because it is difficult, it must remain documented. The moment carries forward without closing the thread. Zhenyuan has learned that every rescue creates another duty, every record opens another wound, and every rule will be tested exactly when breaking it would feel easiest. That is why no one is allowed to treat this as a clean heroic advance. The path into the training center is built from frightened testimony, medical limits, public costs, uneasy alliances, and the stubborn insistence that a person remains a person even after the enemy has tried to turn them into a function. Each step forward therefore has two meanings. It moves Zhenyuan closer to the White Tower, and it forces Zhenyuan to decide what kind of power it will refuse to become. The retreat becomes a test of whether Zhenyuan can carry victory without dropping the vulnerable. White Tower rear guards try to pin the team between the underground stair and the corridor. Zhou Ping and Fang Yuan hold the bend together, one with Zhenyuan discipline and one with hard northern strength. Zhenyuan survives because it keeps turning emotion into rules before panic can spend it. Bai Ling refuses to let the evacuation turn into a stampede. Children first, then injured assistants who show no active hostility, then captured controlled fighters if they can be safely bound. Qin Tang carries the sealed roster and hard drives like they weigh more than weapons. They do. Inside them are names, routes, formulas, and proof. Shen Jin's hardest lesson is that not every urgent truth should be paid for with his body. Han Tai's northern line intercepts a transfer vehicle. He reports unfinished bearers inside and does not keep them. The agreement holds under pressure. Chen Yue's southern defense also holds. A small group tries to test the mall perimeter while the strike team is gone, and Chen Yue shuts it down without needing Shen Jin's permission. Mercy is not soft here. It is a discipline that refuses to let the enemy choose what everyone must become. That matters as much as the assault. Zhenyuan can now act in two places at once. By dawn, the first rescued children cross into the outer medical line. Some cry. Some stare. Some still flinch at ordinary instructions. Bai Ling tells the volunteers to stop using command words and start using names. Zhenyuan survives because it keeps turning emotion into rules before panic can spend it. Retreat is where many victories become betrayals. A team can win the objective and still abandon the people who made the objective necessary. Bai Ling refuses that shape. The evacuation order protects children, injured non-combatants, and controlled fighters whenever containment is possible. Han Tai honoring the agreement under pressure is one of the quieter victories of the operation. He does not become Zhenyuan's friend, but he proves that clear terms can hold even when there is profit in breaking them. That proof will matter later, because alliances in disaster are built from repeated survivable tests. Chen Yue's southern defense closes the other half of the operation. The city does not collapse behind the strike team. That means Zhenyuan has moved from heroic reaction into layered command. It can attack, defend, rescue, record, and negotiate in the same night. The retreat forces Bai Ling's medical rules into motion faster than anyone wanted. Volunteers at the receiving line must learn not to crowd the children, not to shout simple orders, not to touch collars or patches without gloves, and not to promise that everyone is safe forever. The right promise is smaller: you are here, we will use your name, and no one will inject you in this room. Han Tai's intercepted vehicle brings another wave of unfinished bearers, which means the knight's victory immediately becomes another burden. Su Li will have to find beds, food, medicine, and explanations. Zhenyuan's compassion keeps arriving with invoices, and still the city chooses to sign for it. The moment carries forward without closing the thread. Zhenyuan has learned that every rescue creates another duty, every record opens another wound, and every rule will be tested exactly when breaking it would feel easiest. That is why no one is allowed to treat this as a clean heroic advance. The path into the training center is built from frightened testimony, medical limits, public costs, uneasy alliances, and the stubborn insistence that a person remains a person even after the enemy has tried to turn them into a function. Each step forward therefore has two meanings. It moves Zhenyuan closer to the White Tower, and it forces Zhenyuan to decide what kind of power it will refuse to become. The White Tower branch in the west is broken, but the war becomes larger. The training center burns behind controlled lines, not as a blind fire but as a sterilized ruin after records and survivors are removed. White Tower power depends on making people into functions. Zhenyuan answers by making names matter again. He Ming escapes, but he loses the western node, the records room, the child waiting room, the transfer lists, the synchronization chamber, the auxiliary pattern fragments, and the credibility of secrecy. Zhenyuan returns with survivors and proof. It also returns with new burdens: patients who may take weeks to stabilize, children who need protection, and technology too dangerous to use without rules. A city is not built only by winning fights. It is built when the people left behind can still decide without the leader in the room. Su Li enters the costs into the ledger as special rescue and medical expenditure. No one is listed as labor, loot, or asset. Qin Tang seals the Xiezhi materials under restricted access and begins writing a new category in the fate pattern rules: tools that break control cannot be used to create control. The difference between rescue and recklessness is procedure that still remembers the person inside the danger. Bai Ling expands the medical rules for rescued bearers. Chen Yue updates defense command. Zhou Ping's first major operation becomes a quiet proof that he can hold judgment under pressure. Shen Jin looks at the roster of names taken from the training center and understands that the White Tower will not treat this as a local loss. White Tower power depends on making people into functions. Zhenyuan answers by making names matter again. By cutting the western branch, Zhenyuan has finally made itself visible to the whole organization. The ending is not safety. It is recognition. The White Tower now knows Zhenyuan is not merely surviving disasters. Zhenyuan is coming for the hands that manufacture them. A city is not built only by winning fights. It is built when the people left behind can still decide without the leader in the room. The aftermath is not clean. Rescued children do not become calm because the right side won. Unfinished bearers do not become safe because the array broke. Evidence does not become justice simply because it reaches a folder. Every success creates new work, and Zhenyuan must be honest enough to call that work part of the victory. He Ming's escape prevents the ending from becoming simple. The villain is not neatly removed. The White Tower's western branch is broken, but the larger organization now has reason to look directly at Zhenyuan. Visibility is a kind of danger. Still, the change is irreversible. The White Tower can no longer treat Zhenyuan as a stubborn shelter waiting to be pressured. Zhenyuan has entered the enemy's structure, removed survivors, taken names, destroyed a control core, and left with proof. The next battle will begin from that fact. In the morning, the outer ring sees survivors before it understands strategy. Children wrapped in blankets. Adults with covered patterns. Guards carrying sealed boxes. Shen Jin pale and bleeding, Qin Tang silent, Bai Ling already giving orders, Zhou Ping unable to stop looking back toward the road. Rumor begins immediately, but this time Zhenyuan has more than denial. It has a restricted briefing, a public cost category, and a clear statement that the training center's western branch has been disabled. The people do not receive every detail. They receive enough truth to keep fear from inventing its own version. The moment carries forward without closing the thread. Zhenyuan has learned that every rescue creates another duty, every record opens another wound, and every rule will be tested exactly when breaking it would feel easiest. That is why no one is allowed to treat this as a clean heroic advance. The path into the training center is built from frightened testimony, medical limits, public costs, uneasy alliances, and the stubborn insistence that a person remains a person even after the enemy has tried to turn them into a function. Each step forward therefore has two meanings. It moves Zhenyuan closer to the White Tower, and it forces Zhenyuan to decide what kind of power it will refuse to become. By dawn, the Western Training Center is no longer a hidden route. It is a broken branch. Zhenyuan has not ended the White Tower, and Ming has not vanished from the war. But the city has crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. It has chosen to attack the machinery behind the disaster, not merely endure the next disaster sent against it. Su Li writes until his fingers cramp. The public version of the cost cannot include private injuries, but it must include enough truth to prevent rumors from inventing poison. Special rescue intake. Emergency isolation. Pediatric care. Fate pattern trauma stabilization. Restricted evidence transport. He stares at those categories and understands that Zhenyuan's ledger has become a moral document as much as an administrative one. A city reveals itself by what it is willing to count without reducing the counted thing to price. Qin Tang seals the recovered files in 3 levels. One for immediate tactical use, one for medical and pattern recovery, and one so dangerous that opening it will require witnesses. The Xiezhi fragment sits apart from the rest. It is not celebrated. No one calls it a miracle. Shen Jin, still pale from the partial line, looks at it and knows the next battles will ask for that power again. Qin Tang knows it too. That is why she writes the first restriction before anyone asks for permission to use it. A line that breaks forced command must never become a tool for command. The sentence is severe, almost legal in its plainness, and it may be one of the most important things Zhenyuan has written. Chen Yue's report arrives from the southern defense before sunrise. The test against the perimeter was small, but real. A few armed scavengers, likely encouraged by White Tower remnants or by rumor that Zhenyuan had emptied itself for the strike, tried to push toward the mall stores. Chen Yue contained them without drama. No collapse, no emergency recall, no desperate message begging Shen Jin to return. For Shen Jin, that report carries a weight almost equal to the destroyed array. It means Zhenyuan can now survive his absence for a night of war. Zhou Ping sits outside the medical line after handing over his shield for inspection. Fang Yuan sits a few steps away, silent, his clothes still marked with corridor dust. They are not friends, not exactly. But they held the same bend while children were moved behind them, and that creates a kind of knowledge neither side can easily dismiss. Fang Yuan finally says that Han Tai will want to know whether the rescued northern bearers are alive. Zhou Ping answers that if they live, their names will be recorded. Fang Yuan thinks about that for a long time, then says the Iron King gang does not usually keep names that carefully. Zhou Ping says Zhenyuan had to learn. Shen Jin does not sleep immediately. He stands before the restricted board until Bai Ling threatens to have him carried back to bed. On the board are names, routes, losses, rescued numbers, sealed evidence, and the empty place where he Ming's capture should have been if the world were fair. The empty place does not mock him. It reminds him what kind of enemy they are facing. The White Tower does not need to win every fight. It only needs enough time to move the next file, the next child, the next unfinished bearer, the next lie. Zhenyuan's task is to deny that time again and again until the system can no longer pretend its branches are separate. When the sun fully rises, the outer ring wakes to a changed city. The posters at the warehouse have new rules. The medical tents have new guards. The communication board has a new enemy priority. The public ledger has a new rescue category. None of these things look dramatic from a distance. Yet together they say that the strike did not end at the training center door. It entered Zhenyuan's procedures, language, and future decisions. That is how a battle becomes history inside a living community, not when people cheer, but when the rules change because everyone understands what must never happen again.